The celebrations echoed across 17 star systems. On every screen, the victors raised their glasses. The war was over. Earth had fallen. The treaty was signed, not in ink, but in the blood and ash of 7 billion souls. But then, a signal. It sliced through every encrypted channel, every secure frequency the Galactic Coalition had. A single haunting image. A human face, scarred and hollow-eyed, staring out into the void. Commander Silas Drayton stood alone on the observation deck of a forgotten outpost on Titan. In the cracked viewport, his reflection showed a man who'd aged 2 decades and half that time. Gray streaked his once black hair. His left hand, the one that still had feeling, gripped a rusted console. Behind him, the skeletal remains of the Terran Defense Network hummed with borrowed power, barely enough to keep life support from failing. He shouldn't have been there. The evacuation orders were absolute. When the Krovar Empire's armada shattered Earth's orbital defenses, every human vessel was commanded to scatter, to hide among the colony worlds, to preserve the flickering candle of humanity. But Silas had other plans. He had watched from this very station as his homeworld burned. He saw the cities turn to glass under relentless plasma bombardment, saw 7 billion lives extinguished in silent, terrible streams of light and fire. The aliens called it pacification, the end of human aggression. Their history books would paint humanity as a disease, spreading too fast, consuming too much, a threat to the delicate balance of galactic life. They'd write that our extinction, while unfortunate, was necessary. Clean, efficient. They even had the audacity to call it humane. What they didn't know, what their vast intelligence networks had so disastrously failed to discover, was that humanity's greatest strength was never its weapons or its starships. It was memory. The burning, unforgiving memory of every wrong, every loss, every moment of pain that carved itself into the human soul and simply refused to let go. Silas's fingers danced across a secondary console, its holographic interfaces responding with a sluggish groan. The old outpost creaked around him, its metal skeleton stressed by decades of neglect. But deep in its core, in chambers that didn't appear on any official schematic, something else was stirring. Something the Coalition had overlooked in their systematic cataloging of human military assets. The Phantom Protocol. 18 vessels, built in absolute secrecy during the final desperate months before Earth's fall. They weren't constructed in the grand shipyards of Mars or the sprawling manufactories of Luna. They were born here, in the ice and darkness of Saturn's moons, where sensor nets were sparse and prying eyes were few. These ships weren't designed for victory. They were designed for something far more visceral: retribution. Each ship carried a crew of 50. Every single one was a volunteer. They were people with nothing left to lose, people who had watched their families die, their worlds crumble, their entire species brought to the brink of annihilation. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were ghosts. They were wraiths, the vengeful dead given bodies of steel and hearts of fusion. Commanding the lead ship, the Nightfall, was Captain Rhys Torhan. She'd been a decorated officer once, her service record gleaming with medals and commendations. Now she wore scars instead, each one a testament to her survival against impossible odds. Her crew called her the Reaper, not out of fear, but out of a deep, abiding respect. She had pulled 17 people from a dying station during the Phobos massacre, carrying them through hard vacuum when her own suit's oxygen ran dry, kept moving on nothing but pure, unadulterated spite. On the second vessel, the Abyssal, was Lieutenant Garrett Wolfe, the chief engineer. He'd lost his wife and daughter in the first wave of attacks, forced to watch their colony ship disintegrate under Krovar fire while he was stationed light years away. He stopped speaking after that. He communicated only through his work, refining and improving weapon systems with an obsession that bordered on madness. His engines ran hotter than any regulation allowed. His reactors pushed far beyond their designated safety limits. He didn't care about tomorrow. Tomorrow was a luxury for people who still had futures. Piloting the third ship, Vesper's Edge, was Navigator Chong Wei. Before the war, she was an explorer, mapping uncharted systems, dreaming of discoveries that would expand the frontiers of human knowledge. Now, she used those same skills to find blind spots in enemy sensor grids, to calculate impossible faster-than-light jumps that should have torn a ship apart, but somehow, in her hands, they didn't. She moved through space like a dancer, as if she'd learned to make death itself graceful. These were the people Silas had gathered. These were the remnants the Galactic Coalition had dismissed as scattered, broken, and finished. They didn't understand. Humans didn't break like other species. They bent, they twisted, they transformed. They were forged anew in the fires of their own destruction, becoming something harder, something colder. The transmission of the victory celebrations continued across the galaxy. Silas watched the Krovar High Command toasting their success. He saw the Theraxian diplomats exchanging satisfied glances. He saw the Quinn trade guilds already carving up the rights to Earth's resources, like vultures picking at a corpse. They thought it was over. They believed humanity would fade into history, just another cautionary tale about a species that reached too far, too fast. Silas pressed the activation sequence. Deep in the ice below, 18 reactors flared to life. 18 ships, invisible to every scanner the Coalition possessed, began their silent drift toward the core worlds. The journey would take weeks. It was time enough to plan, to prepare, to remember every single reason they were doing this. On his console, a new message appeared. Just 3 words from Captain Torin. "We are ready." Silas allowed himself the smallest, faintest smile. It wasn't a smile of joy or satisfaction. It was the recognition of a simple, fundamental truth the aliens had failed to grasp. You could destroy human worlds. You could destroy human bodies. You could destroy our entire civilization. But you could never destroy what made us human. That stubborn, insane refusal to accept the end. That unique ability to look oblivion square in the face and say, "Not yet." The celebration continued on every screen. Let them celebrate. Let them drink and revel in their complete and total victory. Because in the cold, silent darkness between the stars, something was coming. It wasn't an army. It wasn't a fleet. It was just ghosts, carrying the weight of 7 billion dead, ready to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never, ever forget. Human extinction wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something far, far worse. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the unknown. We'll see you in the next one. For 3,000 cycles, the Krovar Empire had never known fear. They expanded across the galaxy, absorbing systems, integrating species, building their grand coalition on the bones of lesser civilizations. They prided themselves on efficiency, on the calculated application of force, on knowing exactly when to strike and when to negotiate. They were the apex predators in a cosmic ecosystem they'd spent millennia learning to dominate. That confidence was about to cost them everything. Captain Reese Torhan stood on the bridge of the Nightfall, hands clasped behind her back, watching the tactical display with eyes that hadn't slept in 48 hours. She didn't need sleep anymore. None of them did. The medical officer, Dr. Emil Vasquez, had explained it weeks ago during their final preparations. Trauma changes brain chemistry. When you experience loss at a certain magnitude, your neural pathways rewire themselves. The body stops recognizing rest as necessary. It recognizes only the mission. Around her, the bridge hummed with quiet activity. No unnecessary chatter. No jokes or banter like the old days. Her crew moved like shadows, each person locked into their role with mechanical precision. They drilled this attack sequence 600 times. They could execute it blind, deaf, with half the ship on fire. That was the point. When you have nothing left to lose, perfection becomes easy. Navigator Chun Wei's voice cut through the silence, steady and cold. Approaching the Viridian Gate, 20 minutes until optimal insertion point. The Viridian Gate was the crown jewel of Krovar infrastructure. A massive space station orbiting the Empire's capital world, serving as both military headquarters and diplomatic center. 50,000 personnel. Defense grids that could vaporize an approaching fleet before it even crossed the outer markers. Shields capable of withstanding sustained bombardment from capital ships. Against a conventional attack, it was utterly impregnable. But the Phantom Protocol ships weren't conventional. They were built on principles the Krovar had dismissed as impossible. Human engineers, pushed beyond the boundaries of sanity by sheer desperation, had discovered something the galaxy's greatest scientists had overlooked. Space wasn't empty. It had texture, depth, layers that could be manipulated if you were willing to sacrifice safety for stealth. These ships didn't just mask their signatures. They folded into the very substrate of reality itself, becoming less than shadows, more like absences, holes in the fabric of existence that sensors simply couldn't perceive. The technology came at a cost. Crew members reported headaches, nosebleeds, moments where they couldn't quite remember who they were. But what was a little mental degradation compared to extinction? Lieutenant Garrett Wolf's console lit up with amber warnings. The engineer didn't even glance at them. His fingers moved across the controls, adjusting reactor outputs, compensating for fluctuations that would normally trigger automatic shutdowns. He'd stripped away every safety protocol, every failsafe that might compromise their stealth. If something went wrong, they wouldn't explode. They'd simply cease to exist, erased from reality like a file deletion. That was fine with him. Oblivion was just another form of peace. On the tactical display, the Viridian Gate grew larger. Torhan could see the defensive platforms arranged in perfect geometric patterns, the patrol routes of Krovar destroyers, the shimmer of energy shields creating a dome over the station. It was beautiful in its way, the product of centuries of military refinement. All of it useless against an enemy they couldn't see coming. She thought about her family. Her husband Marcus had been a teacher, specializing in ancient Earth literature. He used to read their daughter bedtime stories about heroes and monsters, about good triumphing over evil through courage and sacrifice. Their daughter, Sophie, had been 7 years old. She'd wanted to be a pilot, just like her mother. She drew pictures of herself flying through space, exploring new worlds, meeting alien friends. The Krovar had incinerated them along with everyone else in their residential sector. Efficient, clean, necessary. Torin's jaw tightened. Her hand moved to the command console, hovering over the final authorization sequence. Across the fleet network, similar scenes were playing out. On the bridge of the Abyssal, Garrett Wolf stared at a photograph he kept taped to his station. His wife and daughter, smiling on some beach vacation years ago. He'd stopped crying months ago. Now he just felt cold, like all the warmth had been sucked out of his universe, leaving only the mathematical precision of revenge. On the Vesper's edge, Shun Wei calculated trajectories with the focus of someone solving a complex equation. She'd reduced the entire attack to numbers, to vectors, and timing windows. It was easier that way. Numbers didn't scream. Numbers didn't burn. Throughout the 18 ships, 600 personnel prepared for what came next. Some prayed to gods they no longer believed in. Others sat in silence, communing with memories of the dead. A few, the ones who'd broken in ways that couldn't be repaired, smiled. They'd been waiting for this. The galaxy had taken everything from them. Now it was time to pay the bill. Insertion in 5 minutes, Chun Wei announced. All ships reporting optimal stealth integrity. Torhan activated the fleet-wide channel. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of extinction. This is Nightfall. Final authorization code. Remember them. Acknowledge. One by one, the other captains responded. Their voices were flat, emotionless, but underneath ran currents of something ancient and terrible. It wasn't hatred. Hatred was too hot, too human. This was something colder. The universe's indifference, made manifest, turned back against those who'd wielded it so carelessly. Abyssal acknowledges. Remember them. Vesper's Edge acknowledges. Remember them. 17 more confirmations followed. 18 ships. 600 ghosts. One purpose. The Viridian Gate filled their view screens now. Torhan could see the lights of the station, windows where Krovar officers worked at their posts, confident in their safety, in their victory. She wondered if any of them ever thought about Earth, if any of them lost sleep over the genocide they'd committed. Probably not. In their minds, they'd done the galaxy a favor, removed a threat, maintained the balance. They were about to learn what imbalance really meant. Weapons hot, Garrett Wolf reported from engineering. Targeting solutions locked. Reactor output at 140%. That should have been impossible. Reactors operating above maximum capacity for more than a few seconds would melt down, would turn the ship into an expanding sphere of plasma. But Wolf had rebuilt every system, had pushed the boundaries of physics through a sheer refusal to accept limitations. The reactors held. They always held, because the dead demanded it. 60 seconds to firing range, Chen Wei said. Still undetected, Torhan watched the countdown. Her hand was steady on the command console. Behind her, Dr. Vasquez monitored the crew's vital signs. Elevated heart rates across the board, but that was expected. They were about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They were about to prove to the galaxy that humanity's extinction came with a price tag that would bankrupt empires. 30 seconds. The station continued its peaceful rotation. Ships docked and undocked. Krovar personnel moved through corridors, ate meals, slept in their quarters, living their lives, secure in the knowledge that they were the victors, the survivors, the inheritors of a galaxy freed from human aggression. 15 seconds. Torhan thought about Sophie's drawings again, about the alien friends her daughter had wanted to meet, about the future that had been stolen, not just from one child, but from billions, from an entire species that had dreamed of reaching the stars in peace. They'd reached the stars and found only monsters. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire. The universe held its breath. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The Viridian Gate continued its rotation, lights twinkling like artificial stars. The Krovar personnel, inside going about their duties with the casual confidence of the invincible. Then reality tore open. 18 points of absolute darkness materialized around the station. Not ships emerging from stealth, but wounds in space itself, as if existence had been cut with invisible knives. From those wounds came light, but not the kind that brings warmth or life. This was the light of fusion cores, pushed beyond their limits, of weapons that shouldn't exist, of human ingenuity twisted by grief into something the galaxy had never seen. The first salvo hit the defense platforms before their sensors registered the threat. Torhan watched as million-ton structures simply ceased to exist, not exploded but erased, their atomic bonds unraveled by weapons that operated on principles the Krovar hadn't even theorized. The defensive grid, so carefully arranged, so perfectly calibrated, collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Inside the station, alarm screamed. Krovar officers rushed to their posts, trying to understand what was happening. Their screens showed nothing. No attacking fleet. No missile signatures. Just 18 empty spots in space that were somehow destroying everything they'd built. Commander Breck Thorne, head of station security, had been reviewing supply manifests when the attack began. He was a veteran of 40 campaigns, had seen combat across a dozen systems. He'd helped plan the final assault on Earth, had watched from orbit as human cities turned to slag. He'd felt nothing then. It was strategy. It was necessary. Now, watching his impregnable fortress crumble, he felt something he hadn't experienced in his entire military career. Terror. Get me targeting solutions. He roared at his tactical officer. Find them. Sir, there's nothing on sensors. The defense grid is reporting impacts from nowhere. It's impossible. Nothing is impossible. They're human remnants, not ghosts. But that's exactly what they were. Ghosts with guns. Ghosts with purpose. Ghosts who'd learned that the only way to make the galaxy listen was to speak in the language it understood. Overwhelming, undeniable violence. On nightfall, Torin's voice remained calm. Second wave? Target their communication arrays. I want them silenced. The Phantom fleet shifted, their invisible forms moving through space like death itself learning to dance. More weapons fire, more impossible shots that originated from empty coordinates. The station's massive communication towers, capable of broadcasting across half the Empire, shattered like crystal. Debris spiraled away in elegant arcs, each piece catching starlight for just a moment before tumbling into darkness. Dr. Vasquez moved through the bridge, checking on the crew. He paused beside a young officer named Thomas Cade, barely 22, who'd been orphaned when the Krovar glassed the colony on Proxima. The kid's hands shook on his console, not from fear, but from something else. Relief, maybe. Or recognition that suffering could be shared, that the weight they'd carried could finally be transferred to someone else. Stay with me, Thomas, Vasquez said quietly. We're almost done here. But they weren't. Not really. This wasn't about destroying one station. It was about sending a message that would echo across every star system in the Coalition. It was about proving that you couldn't murder an entire species and expect to sleep peacefully afterward. It was about teaching the galaxy that human beings, when pushed beyond the edge of endurance, didn't break. They became the edge itself, on Vesper's edge. Chun Wei watched her navigation data with the detached focus of someone solving a beloved puzzle. She'd plotted 17 different escape routes, each one threading through gaps in the responding fleet's formations. She could see the Krovar reinforcements burning toward them, capital ships accelerating at maximum thrust, fighter wings launching like angry insects. They'd arrived 12 minutes too late. 12 minutes was an eternity in combat. 12 minutes was long enough to reduce the Viridian Gate to floating scrap. 12 minutes was long enough to prove that humanity's extinction hadn't been the end of the story. It had been the prologue. Lieutenant Garrett. Wolf's reactor readings climbed into ranges that should have liquefied his ship's hull. The metal groaned around him, stress fractures spreading like veins through bulkheads. He didn't care. His wife used to tell him he was too focused, that he needed to learn to let go, to accept things he couldn't control. She'd been right, of course. She'd been right about everything. He should have been there with him. Should have died in that colony ship. Instead, he was here, turning his grief into thrust ratios and power outputs, making sure that every shot counted, that every Krovar life ended with the same casual efficiency they'd shown Earth. The station's shield generators, overloaded one by one. Secondary explosions rippled through the structure. Entire sections depressurized, venting atmosphere and personnel into the void. Commander Thorne watched it happen from his command center, watched his perfect fortress die around him, and finally understood what humanity had felt in those last moments. Not the pain of death, but the helplessness of knowing death was coming and being unable to stop it. His communication console crackled to life. A voice, human and female, cut through the static. This is Captain Rhys Torhon of the Terran Phantom Fleet. You're wondering why this is happening. You're wondering what you did to deserve this. Thorn's hand moved to the console. You've already lost. Earth is gone. This changes nothing. You're right. Torrens' voice held no anger, no satisfaction. Just statement of fact. Earth is gone. 7 billion souls turned to ash because you decided we were inconvenient. And you're right that this changes nothing. The dead stay dead. But here's what you don't understand. We're not here for victory. We're not here for territory or resources or political leverage. We're here because you need to know that human extinction has a cost. We're here because the galaxy needs to learn that you can't wipe out an entire species without someone coming back to collect the bill. Another explosion rocked the station. Life support began failing in the outer rings. We're going to hit every major installation in your empire, Porhan continued. Not because we think it will bring our families back. Not because we think it will change the past. But because if humanity has to die, we're taking your peace with us. We're making sure that every time you look at the stars, you remember what happened when you pushed us too far. We're making sure that future species know what happens when the galaxy decides extinction is acceptable policy. The transmission cut off. Commander Thorn stared at his screens as another section of the station tore away. Around him, his officers worked frantically to save what they could. Some were succeeding. Most weren't. By his calculation, they'd lost 40% of the station already. Maybe 60% of personnel. Numbers that should have been impossible against an enemy they still couldn't see. He thought about Earth. About the campaign reports that had crossed his desk. About efficiency and necessity and the greater good. Abstract concepts. Clean numbers. Acceptable losses in service of galactic stability. Nothing felt abstract anymore. On nightfall, Torhang gave the order she'd been saving. All ships, execute final strike package. Let's make sure they remember this day. The Phantom Fleet unleashed everything at once. Every weapon, every missile, every ounce of destructive capability they'd been holding in reserve. The Viridian Gate, symbol of Krovar power and prestige, broke apart like a dying star. Metal twisted, reactors detonated in chains. And for just a moment, the darkness of space blazed, bright enough to be seen from the planet below. Then the 18 ships folded back into the shadows, becoming absences again, holes in reality that sensor nets couldn't track. They scattered into different vectors, each one calculated by Chun Wei to exploit gaps in the pursuing fleet's formations. Behind them, they left ruins and questions and thousands of bodies floating in the void. The galaxy would ask why humanity had done this. They would call it terrorism, barbarism, the death throes of a savage species. They would use it as proof that Earth's extinction had been justified. But in quiet moments, when Krovar officers lay awake in their bunks, when Theraxian diplomats reviewed security reports, when Quinn traders calculated new insurance premiums, they would remember. They would remember that somewhere in the darkness, human ghosts still prowled. They would remember that extinction came with consequences, and they would never feel safe again. That was enough. Not justice, not victory, but enough to honor the 7 billion dead, enough to prove that humanity's last word wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a promise of retribution.